Most people think it's impossible to escape North Korea, but this woman proved it is possible, not escaping once, but twice, after two miraculous escapes that completely outsmarted the North Korean government. Last year, I made a video on how to escape North Korea in the year 2024, but multiple developments have taken place this year that has led to new stories of how North Koreans are finding new ways to escape the country that have never been attempted before. Today in 2025, North Korean leaders have made it almost impossible to escape the country. A couple thousand North Koreans typically escaped each year, but in recent years, this number has dropped to roughly just 100 each year. With border crossings historically being nearly impossible, this has led North Koreans to have to come up with extremely dangerous and creative ways of making it out of the country, and a young 19-year-old girl named Ji-yoon Park certainly wasn't an exception. At a young age, Ji-yoon remembered her uncle dying in front of her from starvation. Because of this, Ji-yoon started questioning why the North Korean people respected their government's leaders so strongly when the citizens barely had any food to live. She would never question this out loud, neither would her father, but deep down they knew this wasn't right. Ji-yoon and her father had talked about escaping North Korea together, but it wasn't long before her father's health grew dramatically worse, also due to starvation. The father's condition eventually became so bad that he told his daughter, "You need to save your younger brother, you need to leave North Korea." Ji-yoon finally came to the realization that her father was correct, so she gathered all the rice she could find and left it for him before saying her final goodbyes. Ji-yoon and her father grew up in Haesong, North Korea, which is right across the border from China, separated by the Yalu River. This is a relatively remote area, surrounded by mountains and forests, and has a significant military presence due to its close proximity to the Chinese border. Ji-yoon, who was 19 at the time, directed her 14-year-old brother to meet her near the Yalu River that night at midnight. The Yalu River was frozen, given it was winter during this first escape attempt. Ji-yoon and her brother tiptoed down to the bank of the river, crouching, in order to avoid being detected by any of the North Korean guards. Once they finally made it to the banks of the river, Ji-yoon finally told her brother to grab her arm, and they went out into a full sprint across the frozen river. North Korea enforces a strict shoot-to-kill policy for people attempting to escape the country, so Ji-yoon knew how high the stakes were at this very moment. In the section of the river they were attempting to cross, it was only roughly 25 meters from one side to the other. Once Ji-yoon and her brother were about halfway across the river, they heard shouting from the North Korean side, telling them to stop immediately. Then, gunfire broke out. Somehow Ji-yoon and her brother managed to not get hit by any of the bullets and were now running up the bank of the river onto the Chinese side of the border. Once making it onto Chinese land, Ji-yoon and her brother ran up to the first house they saw and immediately started banging on the door. A Chinese farmer answered, immediately letting them inside, and began serving them an extravagant meal compared to what they were used to, including white rice and boiled eggs. This was a massive surprise to Ji-yoon and her brother, as North Koreans are told that China is an extremely poor country. The Chinese farmer then went on to say that by the morning, they wouldn't be safe here considering the gunfire that just rang out. It was assumed that Chinese officials would come searching the area, looking for any North Korean defectors. China has a long-standing agreement with North Korea, where any North Korean defectors they find in their country are immediately sent back to a North Korean prison. This Chinese farmer went on to say that if Ji-yoon does not marry him, then he will contact police and she will be immediately sent back to North Korea. As for Ji-yoon's brother, the Chinese farmer didn't see any point in keeping him around, so he contacted Chinese police and had this young 14-year-old boy shipped back into North Korea, where Ji-yoon never saw him again. Ji-yoon was then acquired by this Chinese man and lived as a slave on his farm. Ji-yoon worked from 4:30 a.m. until it got dark in the evening and was only given rice and kimchi. Ji-yoon now felt completely defeated, as her life was essentially the same as it was in North Korea, except now she had lost all her family. Ji-yoon was thinking about ending it all until one day she found out she was pregnant. 9 months had now gone by, and Ji-yoon could tell she was ready to give birth, but nobody in China was willing to help her. Ji-yoon was all alone, but successfully gave birth to her child after a long, painful day. For the first 5 years of Jae-hoon's son's life, the two moved around China to many different areas. They were trafficked and sold from one Chinese man to the other, always on the move to evade Chinese officials. By this point, Jae-hoon was now working in a Chinese market during the nights. One night, around midnight, Jae-hoon came home to 10 large Chinese officials there waiting for her. These Chinese officials arrested Jae-hoon in front of her 5-year-old child and told her she was in the country illegally and that she was being sent back to North Korea. Jae-hoon's child didn't understand what was going on in the moment and asked his mom, "Mommy, why are you abandoning me? Why are you leaving me?" At this moment, Jae-hoon's life was completely turned upside down, knowing there was nothing she could do in her power to protect her 5-year-old son. Not only did Jae-hoon not have enough time to explain what was going on, but her son was also too young to understand why she was being taken away. Jae-hoon was then shipped back to a North Korean secretive prison camp, but this was only the first half of her story. Jae-hoon knew she had to find a way to escape once again. In these North Korean prisons, intended for North Koreans who got caught trying to escape the country, 50 to 60 North Koreans are all placed together in one room. These prisoners have to sit down against the wall from 5 a.m. to 11 p.m. and aren't allowed to move at all. There's typically no lights in these rooms, and the prisoners all have one bucket to use as their toilet. One day, Jae-hoon found one of her legs was becoming extremely swollen and she began developing a high fever. The leg was starting to swell to the point that it was emitting a terrible odor, and the other prisoners were complaining about it. The North Korean prison guards figured Jae-hoon didn't have much time left to live and sent her to a government-run orphanage house where she could spend her last days there. Jae-hoon was in this orphanage house for 3 months, and her leg wasn't getting any better, but it also wasn't getting any worse. Jae-hoon knew that considering she had remained in relatively decent health for this long, there was a risk of her getting sent back to a North Korean prison. Jae-hoon knew that this could be her last chance to escape. The first time Jae-hoon escaped the country, she did it without what is known as a broker. A North Korean broker is someone who targets North Korean women, illegally helps them escape to China, and then sells them to Chinese men to be trafficked. With the current condition of Jae-hoon's leg, this time she decided it would only be possible to escape through a North Korean broker. Jae-hoon knew what it was like to be trafficked in China, but at this point, she was willing to do whatever she could to hopefully one day see her son again. This broker then assembled a group of Jae-hoon, another North Korean woman, and one other older North Korean man who had a family living in China. Jae-hoon didn't tell her broker about her leg and used pants to conceal the injury, knowing this could lead the broker to not accept her business. At midnight, the 4 of them crossed the Tumen River in an area that this broker knew wouldn't be patrolled by any North Korean guards. The 4 made it into China and had to avoid any roads so that they wouldn't be seen. In China, you can be awarded a substantial amount of money if you turn in any North Koreans, said to be almost life-changing money. There's even some Chinese citizens who don't work, they just camp out on the border and search for North Koreans to turn into the government. This can be seen as a very lucrative business. The 4 of them walked through the wooded hills on the Chinese side of the border and eventually stumbled upon a taxi on a remote road. The 4 hurried into the taxi, playing it off like they're ordinary Chinese citizens. The only problem was, Jae-hoon was the only one in the taxi who knew the Chinese language out of the 4. The taxi driver seemed suspicious, asking questions as to why only one of them knew Chinese and what exactly all of them were doing together. Jae-hoon had to play it off like the 2 men, one being the North Korean broker, grew up in Koreatown and they never graduated high school, thus never learned the Chinese language. As for the other girl, Jae-hoon played it off like this was Jae-hoon's sister and she was deaf in both ears. Later in the journey, the taxi driver asked more questions regarding why exactly they were in the woods alone at night, and then Jae-hoon made the extremely quick decision to roll up her pants and show the driver her leg. Jae-hoon explained that they were hiking and she got bit in the leg by a snake. When the driver saw this, he immediately slammed on the gas and believed their entire story. The 4 of them finally arrived at the Chinese broker's house, and the North Korean broker was initially very angry, wondering what Jae-hoon was saying to the taxi driver the entire ride. Jae-hoon explained everything, and then the group bursted out into laughter, realizing the lies Jae-hoon told the taxi driver. Jae-yoon thought this impressive move would have softened up the North Korean broker so that she could call her son, but when she asked that night, the North Korean broker immediately denied Jae-yoon's request. The next morning, the other girl who snuck across in the group was already gone, sold to another Chinese man. For some reason, the North Korean broker had a slight change of heart this morning though, and told Jae-yoon she could call her son only once. Jae-yoon quickly grabbed a phone and called her son's grandmother's house. The son was able to get on the phone, and both Jae-yoon and her son couldn't do much other than cry, thankful both were still alive. After an extremely emotional phone call, the North Korean broker decided to change his mind. The North Korean broker told Jae-yoon, "You saved my life last night. If that taxi driver knew we were from North Korea, I would have got sent back to a North Korean prison and never would have seen my two sons again. Thank you for saving my life last night. So this time, I'll save your life. You have to go." Jae-yoon was then able to reunite with her son and go live with him in secrecy in Beijing. While in Beijing, Jae-yoon met a Korean pastor who had connections to the United Nations. This pastor was able to hand off Jae-yoon and her son to the United Nations, and then they were flown to the United Kingdom to finally live free. These escapes across the Yalu River by Jae-yoon took place in 1998 and 2008, a time where it was relatively easier to escape North Korea than it is today. For example, in 2011, 2,706 people escaped North Korea, but in 2012, 1,502 escaped, a 44% decrease in just 1 year. This is largely in part to the fact that Kim Jong-un took over as North Korea's leader in 2012, following the death of his father, Kim Jong-il. Kim Jong-un intensified surveillance and control measures to prevent North Koreans escaping the country, as these defections were seen as a threat to his regime's stability. He wanted to project an image of strength and maintain a tighter control over his population. The next major decrease in defections came in 2020 when the COVID pandemic hit. The North Korean regime completely sealed off its border with China and Russia, the two main escape routes for most North Korean defectors. Border crossings over the Tumen and Yalu rivers became nearly impossible due to the increased number of North Korean patrols along this border. New barriers, fences, and surveillance systems were also added along the border. North Koreans also needed travel permits to travel from one province of North Korea to the other. This made it much more difficult for people living in North Korea to make it to other border towns and provinces, as virtually all North Koreans were trapped within their hometowns. These factors all combined together led to a record low number of North Koreans successfully escaping the country, with only 229 successful North Korean defections in 2020. This was a dramatic 80% drop from its previous year in 2019, where 1,047 North Koreans were able to escape the country. But you may be wondering why more North Koreans don't try and escape through the southern part of the country. In China and Russia, if they catch North Koreans in their country, they immediately send them back to North Korea, while in South Korea under their constitution, you're automatically granted South Korean citizenship. Escaping directly to South Korea has been seen as virtually impossible, where an estimated less than 1% of North Koreans able to escape the country do so through the southern border. Separating North Korea and South Korea is a demilitarized zone that stretches roughly 250 kilometers long and about 4 kilometers wide. The demilitarized zone, or often referred to as the DMZ, is one of the most heavily militarized borders in the world and serves as a buffer zone to reduce the risk of any conflict between the two countries. This zone is mostly undeveloped, consisting of forests, rivers, and hills. Inside the DMZ, there's also many minefields, making it extremely dangerous for someone to walk through. Despite this danger, a select few North Koreans have attempted to escape the country by going directly through the DMZ. In August of 2024, a North Korean soldier whose name wants to remain hidden decided he needed to escape the country. For the purpose of this video, we'll refer to this man as Lee. But before I explain how Lee was able to escape North Korea, I need to tell you about the sponsor of today's video, Delete Me. I've recently been learning about the privacy risks that comes with online brokers selling my personal information across the web. I wanted to try and prevent this, so I tried out Delete Me, which is a hands-free subscription service that will remove your personal information that's being sold online. Data brokers are massive corporations that collect huge amounts of our personal information, like our social security number, birthdays, and even home addresses. With Delete Me, all you have to do is submit your personal profile with info you want them to remove, and then their privacy experts scan the internet to find data brokers with your information. After 7 days, Delete Me will send you a privacy report that breaks down info like how many data brokers had access to your personal info, as well as all the listings Delete Me removed, and other key information regarding keeping your private information actually private. I personally like Delete Me because they'll keep sending me these privacy reports regularly, so I get to know that this service is actively working to protect my digital privacy. If you want to try out Delete Me today, you can get 20% off a Delete Me consumer plan by scanning this QR code or visiting joindeleteme.com/uncovering. That's joindeleteme.com/uncovering. You can also click on the link below in the description. Get started securing your digital privacy today by scanning this QR code, and thank you again Delete Me for sponsoring this video. Lee was a mid-level officer in the North Korean military who had a relatively privileged life, at least compared to many North Koreans. Lee was also one of the guards stationed along the DMZ, which meant the military saw him as one of their most trusted soldiers. On a foggy night in August of 2024, Lee took advantage of this limited visibility to attempt his escape. Some of Lee's military partners, also stationed along the DMZ, appeared to not be standing guard very attentively, given it was late at night. Given the unique circumstances, Lee left his post and set off into a 2-kilometer-wide section of the DMZ, armed with just a basic survival kit. Given the dense vegetation and the thorny bushes of the DMZ, Lee had to crawl most of the way. Lee also felt he had a good understanding of where the minefields were located, so he chose a path that would hopefully avoid setting off any of these landmines. Shortly after entering the DMZ, a few North Korean guards noticed Lee was gone, and then thought they spotted him crawling through the dense bushes of the DMZ. Given how foggy it was and late at night, the North Korean guards didn't have a clear sight on Lee, however. Nonetheless, the guards started firing in Lee's direction, shooting approximately a dozen rounds. Thankfully, none of these bullets struck Lee, and he continued crawling faster through the DMZ, knowing that his fellow guards were now onto him. Lee continued crawling for roughly 18 hours until he finally reached the South Korean side of the border. South Korean soldiers had been monitoring Lee's movements and quickly picked up Lee once he had made it onto their land. Lee was physically exhausted, dehydrated, and very wounded from the sharp vegetation he was crawling through. Despite all this, Lee successfully made it into South Korea through the DMZ in 2024, one of the very few North Koreans to ever do it. While escaping to the south is extremely rare, one way more North Koreans have been escaping the country in recent years is by sea. To the east of North Korea is the East Sea, or also known as the Sea of Japan, and to the west is the Yellow Sea. North Koreans don't often attempt to escape by sea, as North Korea has many patrol posts along its maritime borders, and the currents can be very strong and cold, but even in 2024, there have been success stories of North Koreans escaping by sea. A North Korean man, whose name is also anonymous, escaped the country along the western maritime border. This is the Han River and separates North and South Korea to the west. This anonymous man, who we'll refer to as Choi, made it through the military gates and fences that cut off North Koreans from being able to access the sea. Satellite imagery even shows the many different North Korean military bases along the coasts of the country. These military bases are especially common along the Han River, given it's not very far from South Korea. Nonetheless, Choi was able to remain undetected by these North Korean military guards and set out in his small wooden boat to cross the Han estuary. To make it across this estuary and onto South Korean land, you only need to travel about 5 kilometers or 3 miles, but the currents here are very strong, making navigation on the estuary difficult without a proper engine. Choi was in a wooden canoe he built, which is pictured here. Choi chose a relatively calm day and made it across to South Korea's Gyeodong Island fast enough to not be caught by the North Korean military. South Korean military forces apprehended Choi and brought him safely into the country, another successful defection in 2024. Although Choi made it across successfully, another North Korean man who was attempting to cross at the same time as Choi unfortunately went missing. South Korean officials are still investigating this disappearance, trying to figure out what happened to this second North Korean man, but it's likely that the North Korean military was able to capture him before he made it onto Gyeongdong Island. While these successful escape attempts in 2024 are all very isolated incidents, what seems like it'll be the best method for 2025? With Kim Jong-un increasing his military's presence along the entire border every year, North Koreans are going to have to come up with new ways to escape this oppressive regime. Well, in 2025, one of the easiest ways to escape may be signing up to join the North Korean military. Just as of October 2024, it's been reported that North Korean troops are being sent into Russia to help Russia in their war against Ukraine. These North Korean soldiers have been shipped over to Russia in naval ships and dropped off at the Russian port city of Vladivostok. From here, the North Koreans were shipped to different Russian military bases, where they were equipped with Russian military uniforms and were seen training with Russian troops. Vladimir Putin and Russia are buying these North Korean soldiers at a very cheap rate and are sending them into Russia's Kursk region. In the summer of 2024, Ukrainian counterattacks were very successful, so successful that they made significant gains in Russia's Kursk region. Despite Russian attempts at pushing back Ukrainian forces, Ukraine's military has kept their ground in many parts of Kursk. The estimated number of Russian soldiers killed in this war as of late 2024 is between 100,000 to 600,000, and while this is a very broad range, even 100,000 soldiers lost is an extremely bad look on Putin amongst the Russian citizens. In fear of losing even more Russian soldiers, Putin has been shipping in North Korean soldiers to fight on the front lines of Kursk. As of December 2024, it's estimated that roughly 10,000 North Korean soldiers have been sent into Russia's Kursk region and are actively participating in this war against Ukraine. This is the first time that many of these North Korean soldiers have ever left North Korea and are now being exposed to the relative wealth of Russian cities and even have access to the internet. Although there hasn't been any confirmed escape attempts from the Kursk region, this could become much more of a possibility once these soldiers become aware of their situation. To assist this escape attempt, Ukraine has included the Korean language in their I Want to Live hotline, designed initially to help Russian soldiers that want to surrender. The hotline offers a 24/7 service where soldiers can call to arrange their surrender, which guarantees under international law that they will be treated with care and that their rights will be respected. This hotline has gained significant attention, with over 48 million visits to its website and thousands of calls from Russian troops looking to surrender. Now that the hotline includes the Korean language, Ukraine is hoping that these North Korean soldiers catch wind of the hotline and end up utilizing this service to surrender and escape into Ukraine. In 2025, as more North Koreans continuously get shipped into Russia to fight their war, it's likely a significant number of these soldiers could escape into Ukraine. This isn't the first time North Koreans have been sent into Russia, however. For many years, Russia has been utilizing North Koreans as laborers and essentially slaves to fulfill many of their worst manual labor jobs. Although rare, North Koreans have found success at escaping their oppressive regime while working as a slave in Russia. One famous example of this comes from a man named Zane Han. Zane's escape began in the far western region of Russia, St. Petersburg, where he worked intense 15-hour days, 7 days a week. Zane's main job was pouring concrete and laying bricks at construction sites. Zane and his North Korean colleagues were only given 2 days off every year and were confined to their own specialized North Korean housing, cut off from the Russian public. Zane was still motivated to work in Russia, as this was a rare opportunity to leave the North Korean mainland, and he was able to send his profits back to his family in North Korea. This all changed, however, during the COVID pandemic. In order for the North Korean government to profit more off their overseas laborers, the North Korean regime cut these people's salaries in half. At this point, Zane went from making $30 a day to now just $10 to $15 a day. Zane finally had enough. The next day, Zane was allowed to leave his construction site. On one of his 2 days off the entire year, Zane purchased a cell phone from an Uzbekistan coworker for $30, roughly 3 days worth of his salary. Once he got a hold of this phone, Zane called the United Nations Refugee Agency in Moscow. The United Nations then sent out a team to help Zain first escape to Moscow and then to an undisclosed country. From there, Zain flew all the way to South Korea, officially becoming one of the 67 North Koreans to escape the regime in 2022. According to a UN report this year, around 100,000 North Koreans currently work outside mainland North Korea, earning money for Kim Jong-un and his regime. The United Nations continuously tries to reach out to these overseas North Korean workers, but most are in tightly controlled areas with limited knowledge of the outside world. Out of these 100,000 North Koreans living abroad, some of these include high-ranking diplomats living in countries North Korea is allies with. One of these diplomats included a man named Ri Il-gyu, North Korea's #2 diplomat in Cuba. Despite being high up in North Korea's government, Ri was progressively becoming more and more upset with the regime's decisions. For example, Ri wanted to open a North Korean restaurant in Cuba, but this project got shut down by the North Korean higher-ups. Additionally, in 2023, Ri started experiencing serious health issues and requested medical treatment in Mexico. This request was denied, and now Ri was officially at his breaking point. Ri bought an airplane ticket to an undisclosed country and didn't tell his wife and kids until about 6 hours before the flight for fear that this news could somehow spread. According to Ri, "My wife first told me not to make such a dreadful joke, so I showed her our plane tickets and she was speechless." Ri told his wife that there is no hope or future for North Korea. While Ri has kept the details of this defection secret to help protect future defectors, it's believed that he used some type of fake identification to fly out of Cuba, considering North Korea closely monitors their citizens' international travel documents. Ri's family followed him to the Havana airport that day, taking a flight to a third country, and then to South Korea in one of the most high-profile and dramatic defections by North Koreans in recent years. North Korea tries very hard to go after any North Koreans who successfully escape the country, especially those who are at a high level and have important intel about the regime. Ri has said that Kim Jong-un would likely be in a very bad mood if he sees Ri talking to the media publicly. Kim Jong-un might even remember Ri personally, considering they met many times in the past. Following this high-level defection, North Korea decided to retaliate. In May of 2024, North Korea started sending balloons into South Korea. These balloons were described by the regime as gifts of sincerity, which carried garbage such as cigarette butts, worn clothes, soil containing parasites, and other general garbage. This retaliation disrupted normal life in South Korea, where teams in hazmat suits had to come inspect and then dispose of this waste being sent into South Korea. Some of these balloons even caused delays and diversions for planes coming out of South Korea's Incheon Airport, a major international hub. South Korea decided to respond by reinstating propaganda broadcasts across the demilitarized zone for the first time in 6 years. Massive loudspeakers were installed near the DMZ, broadcasting news that was critical of the North Korean regime and emphasizing the freedoms that are available if you escape to South Korea. These speakers are so powerful that they can project messages up to 10 kilometers or 6 miles into North Korea. On quiet nights or in favorable conditions, these messages can even extend further, reaching villages and military outposts deep into North Korean land. South Korea hopes that North Korean citizens hearing these messages could potentially create doubt about the regime's propaganda and expose them to a different reality of the world. In 2025, attempting to escape North Korea will result in stricter than ever punishments. Defectors are sent to either political prison camps or labor camps, where the prisoners endure forced labor, starvation, and even death. High-profile defectors or North Korean soldiers that get caught are often executed right on the spot. North Korea also practices guilty by association, where family members of a defector can also experience severe punishments. Even aunts and uncles of a North Korean caught escaping the country can be denied job opportunities or even education. After serving their sentences, defectors and their families are placed under permanent surveillance, making future escape attempts nearly impossible. These extreme punishments are publicized to all North Koreans in order to distill fear and hopefully prevent future defections. With this all in mind, it makes more sense why the North Korean soldiers being deployed to Russia aren't all that upset with joining a war. Many NATO countries are hoping that these North Korean soldiers are awakening to what the outside world is like and will hopefully escape to a free country. There's already been videos leaked showing these North Koreans in Russia, a rare glimpse into what everyday North Koreans are like. I include these videos and explain in depth what North Korean forces are doing in Russia in this video right here. Thank you again Delete Me for sponsoring this video. To get your data removed from the internet, make sure to check out Delete Me using this QR code on the screen, and you'll even get 20% off.